The fog in London did not just hide the streets, it seemed to swallow them whole. It was the winter of 1899, a time when the world stood on the precipice of a new century, eager for machines, speed, and electricity. But here, on the damp cobblestones of Baker Street, time seemed to have frozen. Clara pulled her wool coat tighter around herself, staring up at the faded wooden sign that swung gently in the cold wind. It read, "Thorne and Daughter, Fine Timepieces." The word daughter had been freshly painted over the word son years ago. A small rebellion by her father against tradition. But now, looking at the dark, hollow windows, it felt less like a rebellion and more like a tombstone. Her father, Elias Thorne, was dead. The greatest clockmaker in England, the man who claimed he could hear the heartbeat of the universe inside a brass gear, was gone. And he had left Clara nothing but this shop, a mountain of unresolved debt, and a single sealed envelope that felt strangely heavy in her pocket. Clara unlocked the heavy oak door. The bell above chimed a sharp, lonely sound that echoed into the silence. The air inside smelled of oil, old paper, and sawdust. It was the smell of her childhood. For a moment, she expected to see him there, hunched over his workbench, a magnifying glass screwed into his eye, muttering to a stubborn spring. But the stool was empty. She walked slowly to the center of the room. Hundreds of clocks lined the walls. Grandfather clocks, cuckoo clocks, and delicate pocket watches disassembled on velvet trays. Usually, this room would be filled with a symphony of ticking. Tick-tock. 1,000 mechanical hearts beating in unison. But tonight, silence. Absolute silence. Every single clock had stopped. Clara frowned. Her father was obsessive about winding them. He used to say, "A stopped clock is a dead soul, Clara." So why had he let them all die? She reached into her pocket and pulled out the envelope. On the front, in her father's shaky handwriting, were 3 words: "To fix it." Her hands trembled as she broke the wax seal. Inside, there was no letter of goodbye, no will, no explanation. Just a key. It was unlike any key she had ever seen. The shaft was made of black iron, twisted into the shape of a serpent, and the head of the key was set with a small, pulsing blue gemstone that seemed to catch the dim light of the gas. Lamps outside. Attached to the key was a small note with coordinates. The basement, behind the shelf of unfinished dreams. Clara knew exactly where that was. The shelf of unfinished dreams was what her mother used to call the rack where Elias stored his failed inventions. It was a place of frustration and obsession. Clara lit a lantern and descended the creaky stairs into the basement. The shadows danced against the stone walls like ghosts welcoming her home. She pushed aside the dusty shelf, revealing a heavy metal door she had never noticed before. The key fit perfectly. With a groan of rusted hinges, the door swung open. The room beyond was not dusty. It was pristine. In the center of the room sat a machine. It looked like a clock, but it was massive, reaching from floor to ceiling. Instead of numbers, the face of the clock displayed constellations, and instead of 2 hands, it had 4. The 4th hand was glowing with the same blue light as the gemstone in the key. Clara approached the machine. A plaque at the base read, "The Chronos Dial, for the time we lost." Suddenly, the machine hummed to life. The gears began to spin, not with a mechanical grinding, but with a musical hum. A voice, her father's voice, sogoed from a phonograph built into the side of the machine. "Clara, if you are hearing this, then I have failed. You always asked why I worked so late, why I missed your birthdays, why I couldn't save your mother. I told you I was fixing clocks, but I was lying. I was trying to fix time itself. Clara's heart pounded against her ribs. Time travel? It was the fantasy of madmen and poets. Her father was a scientist, a craftsman. He couldn't possibly believe in such things. But as the fourth hand of the clock began to move backward, the air in the room shimmered. The stone walls dissolved, replaced by the blurry image of a sunny garden. Their garden? 20 years ago, it wasn't just a projection. It felt real. She could smell the roses. She saw a young girl running across the grass. It was her. And sitting on the bench was her mother, alive, laughing, her face flushed with health. Then she saw her father. In her memory, her father was always distant, always locked away in his workshop. But here, in this true memory, she saw him watching them from the window. He wasn't working. He was weeping. He was holding a medical book, frantically taking notes, trying to find a cure for the illness that would eventually take her mother. The scene shifted. The room swirled into darkness and reformed into the night her mother died. Clara had always blamed her father for not being at the bedside. She thought he was too cowardly to face death. But the Chronos Dial showed the truth. He was in his workshop, yes. But he wasn't hiding. He was building a device, a primitive version of a pacemaker, trying desperately to create a mechanical heart to keep her mother alive. His hands were bleeding from the sharp gears. He was screaming in frustration as the mechanism failed again and again. He didn't abandon them. He was fighting a war against death with the only weapons he had: gears and springs. The voice on the phonograph returned, softer this time, broken with emotion. I could not save her. Clara, and in my grief, I lost you too. I buried myself in this machine, hoping to turn back the clock, to find a way to rewrite the past. But I realized too late. Time is not a machine you can repair. It is a river. You cannot swim upstream. Clara fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. All these years, she had carried anger in her heart. She thought her father loved his machines more than his family. But every gear he polished, every spring he wound, was an act of desperate love. The blue light of the Chronos Dial began to fade. The fourth hand slowed down and finally stopped. The visions of the past evaporated like mist in the morning sun, leaving Clara alone in the silent basement. But the silence was no longer heavy. It felt peaceful. The machine let out a final click, and a small drawer popped open at the base. Inside was a standard pocket watch. It was simple, elegant, and engraved with her name. Attached to it was a final note. The Chronos Dial is a failure because it cannot change what happened. But I leave this watch to you, Clara, not to measure the time you have lost, but to measure the time you still have. Don't make my mistake. Don't live in the past. Go live. Clara took the watch. She wiped her tears and stood up. She walked out of the basement, up the creaky stairs, and back into the main shop. Outside, the sun was beginning to rise over London, burning away the thick fog. The golden light flooded through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Clara walked to the large grandfather clock in the corner. She pulled the chains, winding the weights. Then she moved to the cuckoo clock, then the wall clocks. One by one, dot, click, click, click. Slowly, the room began to fill with sound. The heartbeats of the shop returned. Tick-tock, tick-dash-tock. Tick-dash-tock. Clara opened the front door, breathing in the crisp morning air. She turned the sign in the window from closed to open. Her father's time had ended, but hers was just beginning.